the Constitution is such a strong document to form a foundation for a country that exhibits amazing freedoms and rights for the people that live there.
Yeah.
But there's one thing in particular in that document that maybe should have had a little asterisk next to it that accounted for today's day and age, which the founding fathers did not.
This idea was built out for so many different reasons, for well-regulated militia, and more so to for our ability to defend ourselves from a tyrannical government.
Yeah.
So now you've got these guys in Arkansas with their AR-15s thinking to themselves that when I have to rise up against the government, which has AC-130 gunships and F-15 bombers,
that
they're gonna be sitting. Homie, if the government wants you dead, you're dead.
How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Armed Scholar Podcast. In this episode of the podcast, we are going to be reacting to a conversation between Logan Paul and another popular YouTube channel known as the Sidemen. This is a conversation talking about the introduction of gun control, the Second Amendment at large. And this is important because this is a cultural topic happening between two very big YouTube personalities, YouTube channels. I think in combination, these two YouTube channels have close to like 30, 40 million just subscribers on YouTube alone, probably more than that. And their reach is absolutely insane. And here you have both of these sides, both of these two big YouTube channels advocating for gun control. So let's look at this.
Bought a gun. Can I tell you how I bought it? It's really quick.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Just as my transaction was, I just moved to Arizona.
Yep.
I went, here's my ID. They go, all right. There you go.
Right. This is alien.
As you guys can tell, this conversation is going to be very generalized. The people here talking, Logan Paul, the other people on the Impulsive podcast, you know, Mike Malek and everybody that's associated with Logan Paul, plus his other YouTube channel personalities, the Sidemen, which I'm not super familiar with, but I believe they're out of the UK. This whole conversation about gun control is going to be very generalized. They don't know any of the legal intricacies that go in with, of course, the Second Amendment, the legal process, like you just heard there, to actually purchase a firearm. Here you have one of Logan Paul's, not guests, but it's one of his co-hosts for his podcast is mentioning that when he moved to Arizona, all he had to do was walk into a gun store, give them their ID, and he just, got a gun. Now, of course, he went through a background check. He went through the FBI NIC system. He filled out a 4473. They found out he was not a prohibited person, and that's how he got in possession of that firearm. So it's not as simple as he just walked into a gun store, grabbed one, and walked out. There are other things that go on under federal law, and of course, a lot of that stuff's going to be left out.
Why did you buy it?
Just to protect myself, and I'll give you the reason why. My mom has a piece in her purse.
Yep.
My sister does. When we grew up, he knows how I shoot. I would go shooting every single day.
Okay.
And my dad taught me this: it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
And that's a very American thought process. I'd rather have it and not need it. We all say that. We've said that since day one. We sit there, and as people in other countries of the world, we look at you guys and we are dumbfounded.
Yes.
We are blown away by your guys' situation to a point of almost humor.
Okay.
Like we are almost laughing at how you guys act from a standpoint of...
One thing to clear up is, London and UK isn't much better. People get stabbed on a probably daily.
So here they're going to go talking about how in the UK they have a very big violence issue, crime issue, that gun control has not solved it at all. But I want to go back to something that Mike was mentioning. They're framing this as if this is an American topic. Now, I understand, of course, we have the Second Amendment here in the U.S., but the Second Amendment in the U.S. and the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, does not give you rights. It simply just says what the government cannot do to infringe on a fundamental human right or a God-given right, as in my belief, an inalienable right that is not isolated just to U.S. residents. This is something that should be applied to every single nation. Now, every single nation does not have something like the Second Amendment, but that doesn't mean that their citizens, that their residents, that those people that live in those nations do not have these fundamental human rights. It just means that their government is not recognizing that right, that they are infringing on that right, that they are restricting those individuals from being able to defend themselves, defend their family members to defend their country against, tyrants, foreign or domestic. So again, they love to frame this a lot of times as something that's isolated just to the US, but this is a human right. This is a fundamental right that does not have borders. This is something that applies to every nation and should apply to every nation, applies to every state here in the US, and just does not disappear because of magical, invisible borders that delineate something from the US to a different nation.
Based.
Every night
This is what I mean.
Really quick.
there's-
When's the last mass stabbing you had? Where
Okay,
where
it's-
30 people died.
Okay, so it's hard.
more
This
terror
one's
attacks, though.
and it's also quite hard to mass stab people. You still
100%.
understand, right?
That's what I'm
Really
getting
hard to
at.
mass
So
stab
that's what I'm
people.
getting
Yeah,
at.
yeah.
Have you had any school stabbings lately? Like where 30 kids got stabbed in one time?
No.
probably not,
Okay, yeah.
right?
So
Mike's mentioning, when was the last time there was a mass stabbing? Now, let's go by the context of what, variety of sources claim to be so-called mass, shootings in the US. You have multiple sources that define these so-called mass shootings as different things. You have the FBI and their statistics that simply says, 2 to 3 individuals that are injured in any one incident qualifies as a mass shooting. Then you have other ones that's 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. But let's just go by the FBI's. So if you were to look at the UK, then yes, there are multiple mass stabbings that happen every single day in the UK. Now, is it in the context of school incidents and these mass casualty incidents, or however you want to define them, that are much more publicized? No, maybe those don't happen as frequently, but even in the context of firearms in the US, these school incidents don't occur every single day. The statistics that they throw out as far as mass shootings, and they define as mass shootings or mass casualty incidents in the US, a lot of those statistics and numbers are simply gang related. It's gang related shootings that happen every single day in the inner cities and in, Democrat run cities like Chicago and LA and San Francisco and all these other, common ones that we talk about quite frequently. They're happening there in those localities. So yes, to respond to Mike, those, knife incidents happen every single day in the UK if you want to use the same standards that the gun control people use in the US to try to infringe on our rights.
If, say, in Arizona, they pass a law, you have to return your guns. I know, sadly, when I return my guns, criminals are not.
And then go to the other point where he's talking about, just because if, let's say, the state of Arizona passed a law where there was a mandatory buyback, of course, it's not going to do anything to impact criminals. Criminals are not going to be the ones who would go engage in the mandatory buyback. It would be law-abiding people who are threatened of criminal convictions, serious felony convictions, who would be the ones who would be forced to actually turn in their firearms, and criminals would not actually turn those in. And that goes with all gun control. All the federal gun control, all the state gun control does absolutely nothing to actually stop criminals, to stop criminal conduct. All it does is impact the law-abiding people, and yet still the federal government, the state governments, the state governors, and the legislators still put in place further gun control. I mean, we have thousands of federal gun control laws on the books, and we have thousands of state gun control laws on the books, and it has stopped absolutely no crime. Look at California. They have some of the strictest gun control laws out of any state, and the crime rates in some of these cities like LA and San Francisco are the highest in the entire nation.
Here's what I was talking about with the guy the other day. They will say, and by the way, I want to say this. I'm not anti-gun. I don't think
you seem like it.
No, I'm not. Let me talk. One thing I will say is that I am anti. I think we need to dial back on ARs.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Like the idea of putting that level of
don't Walmart
of
sell
round
guns?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So
Asda don't.
So this is what I'm saying, right? That is sort of alien to me as well. Is that you could roll up to say a Walmart and say, "Hey, I need that rifle."
Right now.
Like,
right now.
I can kind of understand a handgun or whatever. I can kind of understand it, but the fact you're whipping around with like this is war-ready.
For sure.
You know what I'm saying?
So why do you?
So many things to point out there. And again, this is a very generalized conversation about guns and gun control. And you can tell from people who don't actually know much about this topic. For one point, Walmart has removed firearms, I believe, from most stores. So I think maybe there's a few isolated stores here and there in some states where you could. But, Walmart and other stores like Dick's and Sporting Goods and a lot of other stores have pulled firearms from their shelves because of the anti-gun agenda. And then when it comes to the evil AR-15, a lot of times you'll hear them reference them as so-called assault weapons here in this podcast, and they call them automatic firearms, and that nobody needs these military rifles and nobody would need to purchase them. Of course, we all know that an AR-15 is not an assault weapon. There's not even a clear definition of what a so-called assault weapon would be federally. Some states have a legal definition, but those definitions vary from state to state. Really what they're talking about is just simply AR-15s, and they're trying to say that there are assault weapons, that they shoot automatic and that nobody would need them. And then they say, well, I could understand why someone would need a handgun. But really, if you were to look at the statistics of so-called gun violence, and no, there's no such thing as gun violence, but if you were to look at the FBI statistics of what they put together as gun violence, you would find that most of this so-called gun violence happens through not something like a rifle, like an AR-15, but happens predominantly through something like a handgun. And yet we have this weird anti-gun agenda that vilifies these scary AR-15s, that targets these scary AR-15s and wants to ban them completely. And yet they say, oh, we're okay with handguns. Now, if they were being consistent, why would you not target something, or if you were being logical, why would you not target something like a handgun, which actually makes up a majority of, the so-called gun violence? And again, gun violence isn't anything real. It's just a term that they coin. It's simply just crime, or really what happens a lot of times when you put together that definition of gun violence, a lot of times it also includes things like suicide. So a lot of those numbers are inflated as well. But if you were being logical, why would you not target handguns? And it just shows you that they've really not looked into this issue at all. They're just adopting a lot of the mainstream talking points, and then putting it on a podcast, putting it out to their subscribers, which again are millions and millions of people here on YouTube.
We are at a point right now, America, where it is very hard to reverse engineer a problem that has been hundreds of years in the making.
Too far gone.
And
It's like compound interest, right?
Bingo.
You've
Bingo.
compounded.
And the other issue is the Constitution is such a strong document to form a foundation for a country that exhibits amazing freedoms and rights for the people that live there.
Yeah.
But there's one thing in particular in that document that maybe should have had a little asterisk next to it.
Yeah.
That accounted for today's day and age, which the founding fathers did not.
So that's a bold statement for Logan to make. Essentially, he's saying that he agrees with almost everything else in the Constitution, everything else in the Bill of Rights, that it's led to the best nation that's ever existed. However, he says that he believes the Second Amendment is, wrong, that he thinks that the founding fathers should have put an asterisk next to it. Now, I would encourage, which I don't think he would ever do, but I would encourage Logan to go do some historical research about the founders, about the ratification of the Second Amendment in 1791. Look at some of the historical context, look at some of the historical discussions by some of the founders. Read at least, the recent Supreme Court decisions in Heller and Bruin, because there's a lot of historical discussion about the Second Amendment in those Supreme Court decisions, about what the founders intended. And he would find that "you shall not be infringed" was put there very purposefully. It was not something that was done flippantly. It was not something where they didn't think about the potential consequences. In fact, recently in the Bruin decision, you had Thomas talk about when he rejected the whole public interest argument, which essentially this whole podcast here, what they're talking about is a public interest argument that we've seen made a million times by various states like California and their attorney generals in the variety of lawsuits that have been engaged in. It's just simply a public interest argument, talking about how in the public's best interest, we need to ban X, Y, and Z. We need to put in place this restriction, this gun control. So here they're just advocating the prototypical public interest arguments. But what Justice Thomas and the Supreme Court justices recently said in Bruin, and again, it's nothing new, they're just pulling from the historical context, was that at the time of the ratification of the Second Amendment in 1791, you reject current day's public interest in the weighing of this because at that time in 1791, the founders engaged in the public interest. They weighed the public's interest when they put in place the Second Amendment. And they weighed those. They weighed the risks versus the benefits, and they found that the benefits clearly won out, and that's why they put in place the Second Amendment, because it was more important that you, as a citizen of the United States, have the ability to defend yourself, your family members, and those around you, through a firearms or whatever other types of arms, that was more important, that you needed that ability to defend yourself. You needed the ability to defend your nation from, the government itself if it became tyrannical or foreign invaders. Because again, in the context of what just happened, the founders just fought a revolutionary war against, the Sidemen's country, against the British who were trying to be tyrannical and were trying to place restrictions on the colonials. And so they fought the revolution against the UK, against the British. And so, again, I would encourage them to look at the historical context, because really what they're just doing here is pushing for public interest arguments and not realizing that those things that they are concerned about were actually expressly addressed by the founders at the time. And the founders knew that there would be technological advancements. The founders knew that, if you were to look at the context of the First Amendment, they knew that there would also be technological advancements when it came to the First Amendment, freedom of speech and due process and all these other things. And they purposely put in place still the Bill of Rights to protect those fundamental human rights, despite potential changes in technology or whatever, because they knew how important those fundamental rights were.
Built out for so many different reasons, for a well-regulated militia, and more so to defend, for our ability to defend ourselves from a tyrannical government.
Yeah.
That's what I heard recently.
i.e. Great Britain.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay,
We got out of that situation.
The red coats. You lot don't like the red coats.
We wanted our ability to defend ourselves.
Yeah.
So now you've got these guys in Arkansas with their AR-15s, thinking to themselves that when I have to rise up against the government, which has AC-130 gunships and F-15 bombers,
My
that
AR
they're
will
going to
do
be
the job.
Homie, if the government wants you dead, you're dead.
You're gonna die.
It's over.
Right?
There's no. So here's the thing at play here.
Again, it's adopting of just these mainstream media talking points to push back against Mike in this statement that he's making. And it's the same statement that Biden likes to make all the time about how, your AR-15 is going to do nothing against, our jets and our tanks and all of that. Historically, even in modern times, in the U.S.'s recent history, just look at the wars in Iraq, the wars in Afghanistan, the wars in Vietnam. You had a small, individual groups of small people that weren't these big conglomerates with a military industrial complex like the U.S. You're fighting with AKs, fighting with whatever they can find, and they tied the U.S. into a multi-year, multi-generational war in the context of Iraq and Afghanistan, in the context of Vietnam. So they act as if we are not aware of recent history. To push back against this point by Mike, and the same thing that Biden puts forward all the time, just look at our recent history. Just look at small warfare, guerrilla warfare, small tactics, individuals with rifles, handguns, improvised weapons can do a lot of damage against a tyrannical government. And they can do a lot to push back against a tyrannical government. And in our history, you had the underdog in the U.S., in the United States, and the colonials fighting against one of the greatest military forces at the time, which was Great Britain. And they won.
America has done a very good job of saying, well, this is where we're at, so unfortunately, this is where we're at. Guns have one job. Kill people.
Yeah.
That kill. That's it. Kill animals, kill.
Protect. You can't put a...
But in what way? In what way?
By doing what?
By
doing what?
By doing what?
Comes into
But
your
by
house.
doing what? But no, listen.
No, but you protect by
Just-
shooting, which will probably kill.
Kill.
No, you don't have to. I'll shoot you in the leg.
So if I...
It could
No, that's
kill.
not how we're trained. You don't train.
Who are you trained by? The Navy SEALs? Who are you
You
trained
could
by?
protect by just pulling out.
You're shooting in center mass. You're not trained.
You can't just say anybody who has a gun's like...
That was a good point that was just made in passing. If you were to actually look at some of the CDC statistics and some other statistics which are left out sometimes, they don't always account for self-defense situations that were prevented or where someone's life was saved because, yes, maybe they did pull a firearm and it stopped whatever criminal conduct at that time. So a lot of the statistics actually don't account for that. So that's a really good point that was made in passing, where it's not always necessarily that you have to shoot the individual. Sometimes the firearm itself is enough of a deterrent. Now, in the context of pulling your firearm, there's a lot of things you have to take into consideration, and that is not for this podcast. Maybe we'll do a self-defense podcast in the future, but you have to make sure that when you're pulling your firearm that you are potentially going to engage in lethal self-defense. You have to make sure that all those legal components to have a justified shooting are present. Immediacy, proportionality, your fear of great bodily death or injury to yourself or others. There are legal considerations you have to take into account if you're going to pull your firearm. But yes, there are millions of incidences where someone pulled their firearm, did not actually fire a shot, but still it protected their lives or other individuals' lives.
Where do you think bad people get guns? Robbers, thieves, people like that?
From good people.
From good people. Now, when the good people, now I'm not saying this isn't problematic, and it sucks if I have to be one of the people that has to die so that in 30 years, kids at school don't have to worry about getting shot.
Yeah.
There may be 10 years where there are some guns in the hands of good people or bad people and not good people.
Yeah.
Just like global warming. People may have to suffer in the short term for the greater good of the country, but eventually those guns will dry up in the hands of good people, and bad people will have nowhere to get them from.
There's never, as a day-to-day normal person, right? I'm just here to live. If I was a US resident, I would never feel like I would need to have something that could end a life. I don't want the responsibility to think, oh, I might have to end a life.
Again, I just appreciate it. At least, I would hope you would have a different thought process as far as this. And it's something that we've addressed even with the recent Lex Friedman podcast, where Lex is saying, if I carried a firearm, maybe I would engage in more violence or whatever. And there's a lot of people who have this strange fear surrounding having a firearm and carrying it. But, it's everybody's prerogative to decide that for themselves. If they are mature enough, responsible enough to have a firearm, to carry it, to be willing to defend their life and other people's lives, to take on that responsibility, to take on the responsibility of knowing the laws, to take on the responsibility of training and being efficient with the firearm. So I can't knock him necessarily for that, because I think that's something for everybody to decide. But then to say, well, I don't feel comfortable with firearms, therefore no one should have firearms, I think, of course, I do not agree with.
Today, if something goes south, I might have to end the life. But I feel like the only reason it's compounded from so many decades and years, right? The only way you're thinking I may have to end a life today to protect myself is because it's happened for so many years.
I agree.
It's nuts.
So when the Constitution was being written, listen, they had muskets, bro.
Yeah.
Try to shoot anything with a
bayonet on the end.
That's
But here's where we're at today. We're not with muskets anymore.
No.
I think there's two things that's in my mind when we talk about these things. One is what I said before. We're not going to remove guns from bad people. Like, the guy's not going to be like, oh, look, the government says give it back. I'm going to give it back. Two, I think we need a better job for sure when it comes to getting a gun. I don't think you have to be 25 to rent a car, but 18 to get a gun. That's weird.
That's backwards.
That's weird. So
Really
I think
backwards.
there should be like a test, a schooling.
Harder back.
And so this is where they start pushing heavy for a variety of gun control talking points. They find issue with age restrictions. Well, you have to be 25 to rent a car, which again, I think is really stupid. How about we just change that? But then they say, well, I don't think an 18-year-old who is considered legally as an adult should have a firearm or should be able to purchase a firearm. I would say, well, then why do we even set the age limit to 18-year-olds as treat them as adults? Because we let them go to war, die for their country. We let them get married, enter into contracts, purchase a car if they want, do a ton of things. We consider them as an adult. We let them vote and all that stuff. But then we would say, well, you're not mature enough to have a firearm. Again, it's just interesting, some of the common talking points, the anti-gun talking points that have bled into this podcast, have bled into that conversation, and is going out to millions and millions of viewers.
Background checks, regulations on automatic rifles or assault rifles,
Yes.
ARs
I agree.
specifically. Buybacks for ARs, and ban certain weapons with a chamber that exceeds a certain capacity.
So there, Logan Paul, one of the most popular YouTubers, is advocating for some of the most popular gun control laws that every town, Giffords and Biden and the anti-gun, people pushing the anti-gun agenda want. Mandatory buybacks, bans on AR-15s or so-called scary assault weapons, bans on so-called large capacity magazines, essentially any magazine that holds more than 10 rounds. They want to put in place national red flag laws. So here you have Logan advocating for, the most popular gun control laws that are out there that the gun control advocates would love to get passed. And here you have one of the most popular YouTubers advocating for federal national gun control and restricting your Second Amendment rights.
Stuff and red flag legislation. Really quickly, we're having a theoretical conversation here. I don't want them to take all the guns. That's ridiculous. I'm saying that.
Yeah.
But there is simple, what I really truly believe to be common sense reform that is ready to be signed in legislation right now.
Yeah.
That is simply being blocked by people who have financial gains to be made by those being blocked. That's what I'm getting at.
So easy to, if you say you have a mental illness or something, it's very easy to want attention, and people that are wired differently now want attention by shooting scores.
That would be another solution. You need the media needs to be very strictly controlled when these things happen, so that the shooter gets or the perpetrator gets absolutely zero.
Anytime.
So they're essentially what they're advocating is a restriction on the First Amendment on the press by saying, hey, press, you can't report on this. We're going to give the government control to say what you can and can't report on, which, of course, I'm opposed to. I do think that there needs to be a cultural shift where we don't have every mainstream media, once one of these incidents happens, jumping on it, broadcasting every single second, running days and days on end, putting the criminal's face on the channel, blasting them, giving them the attention that they want. I think there needs to be a cultural shift, but I am vehemently opposed to giving the government the control to say what the news media can and can't say.
No, and make no mistake, the number one issue that we do face is a mental illness problem.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that should subtract from the fact that we need to figure out the gun situation.
I think it goes hand in hand with like an evolution of humanity.
Well, because the gun solution is legislation that could be quick acting that we could actually put in place in the next 6 months.
Just to slow it down.
The mental illness problem, we got decades ahead of us of trying to fight this situation.
This could be like really stupid to say, right? But see how you've got 6,000 rounds, right? And you're saying, if there was something that said, this is a protection handgun, right? And it's loaded with 1 or 2 bullets. That's all you get, right? Your 1 to 2 bullets is a protection handgun, right? Yeah. And say you do eventually have to use it, right? You go to a specific body and you say, this is the situation. It's been passed by the police and everything like that. I've used my round. You have to submit it.
That's why I asked.
Yeah, like you have to submit it and say, listen, look, I used my round because this situation happened.
When you've seen like the types of riots and stuff that are happening.
So he was right. That's stupid to say. What he is advocating, again, in front of millions of people on YouTube that are influenced by these personalities, these YouTube personalities. What he's advocating for is a government registered handgun that the government knows you have. You only get 1 or 2 rounds, and if you use them at some point, then you have to go to the government and say, hey, I used 1 or 2 rounds that I'm permitted to have, and then maybe the government gives you 1 or 2 back. I mean, that runs into so many issues of like, how do you even train to be proficient with that firearm? What if you need more than 1 or 2 rounds to defend your life? What if there's more than 1 or 2 people who's trying to engage in criminal conduct against you? What if you need more than 1 or 2 rounds to defend your life against one person? I mean, again, it's interesting that this is the type of stuff that is being put out there to very impressionable individuals, new gun owners potentially. The demographic of these two YouTube channels and these YouTube personalities with the Sidemen and Logan Paul is the next generation. And this is the type of stuff that they're hearing through these podcasts. They're hearing these absurd gun control propaganda discussions that are advocating for the mainstream media talking points as far as gun control, the anti-gun agendas, discussions about gun control, the common things like red flag laws, these crazy background checks, these universal background checks, these weird terms that they throw out that aren't really real, bans on AR-15s, bans on magazines, and all these things. And then here you have them saying, well, I have a solution. What if you just have this government-issued handgun with 1 or 2 rounds, and that's all you get to defend yourself? Absurd that is what they're advocating for.
Especially in LA, where like these guys lived and I lived at the time.
Yeah.
It's scary, bro. Like,
Yeah.
and
That's why I asked him, but he's
even LA now, man. These
Because the way you're
people don't come in ones. They come in threes. They come in fours.
It's just it don't make sense to me that it's like when you speak about it, you're like preparing for like The Walking Dead. This is what it feels like. It's like it's so outside the box to me that you're doing this for just other people.
Which is why this conversation is interesting.
It blows my mind that you are preparing for other humans, not like the world ending.
Evil exists, man.
Evil exists, no doubt.
So how am I supposed to walk around? Listen, I don't.
It's just interesting because this YouTube channel, the Sidemen, and the representative of Sidemen, and he's from the UK. It seems like he's built this character of what he thinks an American gun owner is, that there's some sort of crazy prepper or Walking Dead prepper, and that's what they're preparing for. No, these are just moms and dads, sons and daughters, grandmas and grandpas, cousins, whoever, just average people, normal people who have normal jobs, who have normal families, who want to have a firearm, who have the right to have a firearm to defend themselves and their families. They're not these characters that he's built that are doomsday prepper people. Now, if you're a doomsday prepper or you're a prepper, that's awesome. I do prep stuff as well on my own. I think that's also really important. But it's just this weird character that they've built in their minds, and it's this weird straw man that they're arguing against. And it's just interesting that is the narrative that they're putting out there.
Trust, man.
My God, if I could live in a world where I don't
Have
need
to
it,
have it.
awesome.
Yeah.
But bro, like I'm watching these terrible news happen, and I just don't want to be on the news as a dead man. Like I want to protect myself.
On a day-to-day basis, I would say that I like, even when people say they don't believe that we walk around in London or whatever, which is true. Horrible things happen in London, but I live my life on a day-to-day basis that I trust that the human race will just treat me as a human. That's how I want to. I don't want to be so pressured.
I like.
What about the kids that trusted that
that's the
wanted
thing.
to go to school?
But again,
or like,
not everyone's wired to think. I really hope that the human race treats me as I treat the human race today.
I'm unwilling to be that vulnerable.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, bro. There's too much evil.
Do you think that's going to change when you have your kid?
Yeah, first.
Without a doubt, without a doubt, I think my views will change 100% because at that point, I have to care for myself in a different way because I've got to preserve myself to take care of that person now, right?
If you had to move to LA right now,
Absolutely.
no, you have to.
I have to, right? Okay.
You have to move to LA with your daughter.
Yeah.
And when you move in, the guy goes, "Listen, the neighborhood's rough. You're shooting all the time. Do you want to buy a gun before I leave? Last chance. Would you want something to protect your family?"
I still wouldn't take it.
Again, I feel.
I don't
His
think
daughter is a shield.
Fuck's sake. It's hard, man, again, because I haven't lived in a world where I don't know what that feeling, you know how like the feeling inside you when the stuff's going on outside, right?
Yeah.
I've not experienced that, so I don't know what that actually feels like. I don't feel that chemical thing in my brain where I feel like this is about to happen, right?
I need this, yeah.
So the fact, even your theoretical situation you're pointing to me, I can't fully understand, because in my head, again, like I said, I would trust that the world would see me caring for my daughter and just think, we're humans, man. We're humans at the end of the day.
I wish
but again,
it could be like that.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
Just interesting, the perspective. I mean, I can't relate with this. This is very sunshine and rainbows. He doesn't feel threatened at all. He hopes that people will treat him well, that treat him just as a human. And I would just say, I think he's not, there's no way he's ignorant about the human condition, that there are evil people out there that don't care, that you don't want them to do bad things against you. There's evil out in the world. There are evil people out in the world, and you can't walk around with this sunshine and rainbows. And maybe it's just because he's a huge YouTuber and he feels really isolated from the average day person's reality. Maybe he lives in a really nice neighborhood and a really nice house and never is faced with any adversity. But I would say, and what they're trying to do is put him in this situation of, well, what if you were in a bad situation? Would you want a firearm to protect yourself? And he's just like, oh, I would never think about that. That's not my mindset. I would just hope people would treat me as a human and everything would be hunky-dory and we would all just hold hands and skip under sunshine and rainbows and, fields of flower. And it's interesting that there are people out there who have that mentality. That's their mentality. But I tried to be a pragmatist and a realist, and I'm sure a lot of you who are watching this and listening to this are of the same mindset that that there is real evil out there that doesn't care about what you want. They will try to do evil upon you, and it happens every single day. So it's interesting that this mindset is out there and is being fed to the next generation.
This is what I think, right? So if I had a gun and someone pulls out a gun on me, I'm not going to be able to pull out. They're going to shoot you if you have
the whole good gun beating bad gun thing. I think is a lot less likely than people. I mean, bro,
hold on. That doesn't.
Oh, no. That's what I'm trying to say. It just doesn't.
Yeah. There was like
it
10
takes a
years.
guy with a good gun to, bro. All you see is these mass shootings.
Yeah.
By the way, there's
officers of the law.
40
Officers
cops
of
outside
the
school,
law waiting
and there's a person
to not
in there
do anything.
blowing people. And bro, by the way, like I'm not saying like don't give yourself a chance. I totally believe in responsible gun ownership. I really do. I'm going back to that right now. Give yourself a chance responsibly, background check, mental health, restrictions on capacity, all that. But the idea of that defense happening is just you just don't see it happens. By the way, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. There's tons of instances of it.
There's so many.
So it's crazy to me that this type of and it's infuriating listening to this, because again, I know that this has gone out to millions and millions of impressionable young people that are listening to this. And of course, that's disregarding all the curse words and everything that's going on in this podcast, but it's going out to our next generation. And you have here people saying, well, a good guy with a gun stopping a bad guy with a gun doesn't really happen. Those numbers are inflated. And I would say, who do you think stops these shooters? It's always a good guy with a gun. Who do you call in to stop someone like a shooter? You call the police, a good guy with a gun. And then if you were to look at the statistics, the CDC statistics, which they tried to remove and hide about defensive shootings, it's in the millions per year. So good guys with guns, yes, 100% stop bad guys with guns. That's pretty much always what happens. A good guy with a firearm comes in and stops a bad guy with a firearm. And yet here they're saying, oh, that's not real. That doesn't really happen. Then why do we have police? Why do we have the military? Why do we have any of these things? Why do we have good guys with guns if they're ineffective? It's just interesting that they are skewing their mentality to just adopt this mainstream anti-gun agenda and then push it out to their audience.
Many incidents.
No,
if you go online right now and you just type in compilation of people saving their lives from having a firearm, you
tons.
find
But what I'm millions. But if you found millions, and you wouldn't obviously find millions, but you
would find millions.
You wouldn't find millions. But if you found hundreds, you could find a billion of person wasn't able to pull out gun fast enough and got killed.
I think it's more like you save someone else with a gun than save yourself.
But like if you had one in your house,
Like you wouldn't be in the situation. You'd witness the situation and stop it with your gun rather than someone pulling a gun on you and you pulling your gun on them.
That's what happens. So, like, for example, in Arizona, there's many cases where somebody would come in and shoot, and the other person next to them would shoot them dead.
Yeah, for sure.
That's for sure.
So that stopped the person from killing all these people.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
But I'm just saying there's more instances of that not happening is what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? There are instances.
True, guys, listen, like, again, I get it. I understand why you're so passionate. Listen, like, when I hear these stories, the first thing I think of is, man, I really hope we don't get numb to this.
No, we are. That's why we're having.
No, and I pray we don't.
Numb to it because nothing happens.
So while editing this, I realized that my outro was cut out for whatever reason, but that's the reaction to the Logan Paul podcast, the Impulsive podcast with Logan Paul, one of the biggest YouTubers here on the platform, and the Sidemen. Again, between these two channels, these personalities, there's close to 40 million subscribers and millions of views and millions of impressionable, like, young individuals, the next generation of potential gun owners who are being fed a lot of the anti-gun agenda, a lot of the anti-gun talking points. And hopefully that just added some perspective that maybe this gets out to those people, those individuals, these young individuals who want to hear a different perspective and not just be spoon-fed the ridiculousness that really was in this podcast. Hopefully you guys found this information interesting as well, because I know a lot of you maybe aren't exposed to other personalities here on YouTube like Logan Paul and the Sidemen. Maybe you're not aware about their channel at all because you don't watch that type of content, but that is also what's going on here on this platform. and it's happening on this platform between big personalities and content creators that, you know, pretty much make me pale in comparison to their channels. We're talking about, you know, 28 million subscribers on Logan Paul's alone compared to my 500,000 subscribers. And this is the type of conversation that's going on in relation to firearms, the Second Amendment, and gun control. So spread this news around, spread this information around, try to help inform other people here on this platform and other social media platforms as well. Hopefully you guys have found this informative, and thank you guys so much for all of your support. If you like this video, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Again, share these videos. And if you're listening to this on the audio side of things, make sure you are following either on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, and make sure you leave reviews and ratings because that helps the algorithms over there as well. So thank you guys so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.